Hey, you're listening to a Bible Brodown podcast, a member of the Trinity Commission. This is where brothers come together to sharpen one another so we can rightly divide the Word of God. I'm Matt.
And this is Billy.
And for the mini, as promised, we've got a short discussion between me and Billy about the role that Christians should play in politics and how involved we should be, and, you know, should we be involved at all, to what extent, if we should, and that kind of thing. So I guess the best place to start, Billy, do you have any announcements, anything we need to talk about before we get kicking?
I do not have anything.
Cool. Then I think the best place to start is just the question. Is it biblically allowed for Christians to be involved in politics?
Well, let's define politics, first of all. Are we talking about like the governance of a country or area? Or are we talking something else?
I think so. I mean, that's how I understand it, is part of the, any governance of not just the nation, but your local, I guess, school board would be a a public office, right? So down to that level.
Should a Christian? I don't.
Well, is it biblically allowed? Let's start there.
Yes.
Or is it prohibited?
I think it's biblically allowed. I mean, yeah, definitely think it's biblically allowed.
Yeah, I don't know of any place in Scripture that says that it's prohibited. And Paul does when he's talking to, it's in 1 Corinthians, I can't remember where, 7 maybe, where he says that if you came to be a Christian when you were a slave, continue on as a slave unless you can free yourself. If you're free, don't become a slave. If you're married, continue on as a Christian in what you were. If that makes sense. Not that if you were a prostitute, stop sinning. If you were a thief, tax collector, stop doing that. But in terms of your role, he uses us wherever we are. So if you were in government, there's no problem with that. Continue on.
I hope so.
I guess we should do a disclaimer. Yeah, Billy will be the government shill for the episode. But so there's no clear rule against it. You can hold public office. It's not you're not hating Christ by doing that, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think one of the distinctions goes into our Christians who are in politics. Are they Christian leaders or are they leaders who are Christian?
So I guess that'd be a question of, obviously leaders who are Christians just saying they can lead however but they happen to be Christian, versus Christian leader would be the way that they lead. Is that the difference between those two?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to define what those mean too, huh? A leader who's a Christian it has the Christian foundation of who they are, but they're still leading based upon the with a little bit of crossover, the rules and reasons of the governing authority, so to speak. Because you may for instance, like biblical Christian, if you think about my individual responsibility as a Christian, right, in defense, right, or even defending myself, might be different if I was now in charge of a country and the defense of the country.
So a leader who is Christian, we would expect to hold to God's law above the law of the place he's ruling, correct? So in some circumstances, it may involve them quitting that position, I would think.
Right.
If they're in it. But yeah, I think having a Christian in a role where they are governing something, the expectation from the church would be that they conduct themselves as a Christian in all of their dealings, whether it's public and for that particular role or private or whatever. God doesn't show partiality. Just because you're a governor doesn't mean you get an exception to his rules.
Right.
And so we would expect them to adhere to it.
Right. And it's hard too, because there's morality is involved and justice is involved, but there are differences, or there could be differences in how you govern a nation versus your stance as a Christian, so to speak. One of the examples I keep thinking about is like war. Like national policy is that, we would go to war for self-interests. Like if our nation, in order to survive, needs oil.
Yeah.
We will go to, it's international policy that we will go to war for stuff like that. Now it's not politically correct to say, hey, we're going to go fight this country and go to war because we need oil in order for our country to survive. But that's national policy, self-defense policy, or defense strategy, and all that stuff.
So you personally, as a Christian, would you be okay going to war to get oil for the country? You're killing people who could be your brother or sister in Christ. Maybe not. They could be, but they could potentially be. Are you okay with that? I guess this gets off in the military service and things like that.
Right. And that's kind of where my mind just went, is that's where it goes to. I think the more mature I've gotten as a Christian, the more I can't separate the two. Right. I can't separate my Christianity with my service.
So you would have a problem going over and killing people for oil when really you should be loving them and as yourself and praying for them.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear, you're not hating, neither one of us is hating on military, because you were military for how many years? Marines and Air Force?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we're not bashing anybody.
Right. And I'm not even saying that those things aren't necessary. I'm just saying that, it's one of those things that I completely and totally understand those things 100%. It's completely different, though, as if I'm really trying to live the Christ-like way, it's hard to put myself in that situation and act the same way. It kind of goes because there's some government situations, and this actually goes to a post yesterday on our group, where the greater good plays a part, or even the end could justify the means. There could be situations in government and national politics and governance where that's where you may have to make decisions like that.
And to expand this a little bit more, to draw other listeners into the discussion, this happens in corporate world. I'll just say I work in the medical field. I won't go into too much detail, but take quote unquote death panels, for instance. It was when an insurance carrier is looking at the cost of particular procedures for a person who is sick, and whether or not to approve that, things like that. You have the one side of your brain, and again, that's not my field, I'm just using it as an example, but you have your one side of your brain that says, well, this person meets A, B, and C criteria, but they don't meet these other criteria, so they shouldn't get this procedure, and they are denied. And that's just, cold, hard business. And then you have the personal side of your brain that loves them and is like, but the heck with it, let's just give it to them and let's try it. And you face dilemmas like that anywhere in life, not just with military, not just with government, but a day-to-day situation, smaller stuff still happens. So that's just life.
Right. We've been watching a show, Man in the High Castle. It's
Amazon,
on
right?
Yeah. And that's based on if the Nazis won World War I. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that it's 20 years after that occurred. And one of the things that the Nazis still do in that show is they still kill people with the non-curable diseases, where the sick and things like that, they just kill them. And which kind of goes into what you're saying, right? And you see that this high commander of the Nazi Reich finds out that his son has one of these terminal, uncurable diseases, And the rule, the governing law, is that you kill them, you put them out of their misery, so to speak. And so he's got this predicament, and he goes to the side of love, right? He kills the doctor that found out about it and was going to expose him, compared to not killing his son.
So he committed murder so that he wouldn't have to
commit murder on his son. Well, it goes back to blessings of family.
There's no reason not to participate in some kind of public service and some kind of public role. It depends. The expectation for your day-to-day life from God's eyes is that you shine his light, be salt to the earth, and bear righteous fruit. And that's whether you're in government or not, in corporate world or not. So there are all sorts of situations where those butt up against each other, and we have to always keep his rule ahead of whatever we're serving or whatever capacity we're doing.
And know that there might be times where those two things are going to be at odds, and you're going to have to make a decision on that. And that decision may be more harmful if you're thinking about good or good, so to speak, right? We have to choose to kill this person or that person or this many people versus that many people. That may be a decision you have to make in politics, in a governing kind of position. David had to make those kinds of decisions. Do I violate God's law and not go into the temple, or do I look at my people who I care for and feed them the food from the temple? And David went in and fed the people, right? And that goes back to the principle of love. Bigger picture, that's what God wanted from him. He wanted him to love, right, his people, to do that.
So let's get off of whether or not it's okay to be a public servant and how. And I like that phrase, public servant, because that's what you should be doing. Mm-hmm. And talk about politics as we play it in general in the public, where it is a borderline rumor, gossip, nonsense, and a lot of fighting and things like that. Mm-hmm. How involved should we be day to day in the politics of our particular country? And we're talking about the United States, but obviously we have listeners elsewhere. And disputes and disagreements that come with different policy positions and the different parties of people and the infighting that causes. Where, for me personally, that's a caustic, poisonous atmosphere, and I tend to watch it from afar, and I don't get involved in it too much because it just ticks me off. But is it okay for people to be really involved in politics and discussing it, debating it, etc.? Is there danger to it?
I think it goes back to politics is governing, and should we as non-members of the governing authority be involved? I'm trying to rephrase how you asked that question. Should we be concerned with how politicians are governing, right? And should we complain about that and fight against that? And you can even say, should we affiliate ourselves with a specific party?
Let me give you two extremes to help you see what I mean. On the one extreme, you have someone who refuses to do anything political. They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to watch the news when it comes on. They're not going to vote. They say that they're out of the system. They're part of God's kingdom, and they don't want anything to do with the politics. And they're not going to argue with you about it. On the other side of the extreme, you have the person who says, not only am I part of God's kingdom, but I'm going to make sure it comes here on earth, and I'm going to do everything I possibly can to manipulate the system in a fair way. I mean, they're not like cheating, but manipulate the system to make sure that Christians end up running everything, so that we live in a quote unquote Christian nation, and that dominates their goal as a Christian. I think those are two. So, are they both okay?
No, I don't think so. I definitely don't like the latter of trying to force God's kingdom on earth, because I don't think forcing isn't what we're directed to do. And then the other one, where you're removing yourself from the politic arena, it depends on how far you take that, I suppose. I and where it goes.
Obviously, we would advise you to be a prepper that removes yourself from the public completely and doesn't want anybody coming on your property.
Right. Yeah. I understand. I mean, I can see the reasons why people may not vote. I can see, but at the same time, I'm of the opinion that if you don't vote, then you can't complain. That always makes me laugh about people who complain about so and so, and then they didn't vote. So, kind of takes your right to complain about the window. At least that's how I think. We need to remember that we're in the world, but not to be of the world. But that doesn't mean that we can't be involved in the world, but our mechanism should not be the world's mechanism. How we do things isn't the way the world does things. That's the underlying point, that if we're going to be involved in some way, our tactics and our methods of warfare are not to be of the world. It's to be of God's, instructions and his methods.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember, whether you decide to be in politics or not, and I, like I said, I enjoy it from afar, but I don't get too involved, is maintaining perspective. Our perspective is kind of from on high, not that we're better than anybody, but that having trusted the Lord with our salvation and expecting a new kingdom, I am looking at the kingdoms of the world and knowing I don't really belong to any of them. Yes, I am an American. United States, I obviously prefer it. I'm a Texan too, hook 'em. But that's not like that. My identity isn't wrapped up in it. I'm not going to pick fights about it or anything. And to the extent that if the other side, so I would consider myself a Republican, a conservative at least, if the other side hates me for whatever reason, they just make up reasons to hate me. I shouldn't, as you were saying, I should respond in a way that reflects my heavenly kingdom, not reflects my party of choice.
Correct.
So if they hate me because I am pro-life, they're going to have to just keep hating me. I'm sorry. I'm not going to, approve baby murder because they are upset about it. But at the same time, I'm not going to pick fights and hate them back. Now, I will rebut their arguments. I will adamantly be opposed to what they say, but I will do it in a way that I love them as much as I love myself, and I'm willing to pray for them, because that's ultimately what we're supposed to do, right? Is love our neighbors ourselves and pray for our enemies. So
right.
there's a perspective that has to be maintained so that you approach each situation in the right way instead of getting down in that worldly, fist fight.
Right. Yeah, the world's methods, especially in politics, are completely contrary to the Christian methods. Recently, I was just talking to someone who did oppositional research, and that meant that this person followed a certain candidate around and did background checks and looked for basically black marks on this person so that they could expose them. That's not the Christian way at all, right? So yeah, we just need to remember that our methods are not the world's methods, and that our king and our kingdom and our rule set come from high, not from the national entity. Again, that doesn't mean that we don't follow the rules of the kingdom that we're in, the worldly kingdom that we're in, but we do have a higher standard that we need to follow.
Yeah, Romans 13. God did place those governments there for a reason. Acts 17, he established their times and their boundaries. But, like you said, higher standard, higher perspective. We gotta respect him more than respect the the rules that we're under. Right. And we talked about that before. We've talked about if I think it was around the Romans 13 episode that we did about what would we do if the government said, X, Y, or Z, you can't go to church anymore, things like that. We also have one on social justice warrioring with Jonathan, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Back in the day. And I encourage you to go listen to both of those. But the point of this was just to talk through, is it okay to be involved in politics? To what extent? I think being involved in politics is beneficial as being involved in a football team.
Mm-hmm.
This is completely Matthew's opinion, but you can get really worked up about it and just be a butt to the people around you because you're on this team and all the other teams are terrible. Or you can keep up with it, you can participate, but you have a better, higher team that you care more about. And at the end of the day, this is just, well, as the preacher said, it's vanity. It's trivial.
Yeah, and know too that politics and Christian living and Christian justice and Christian morality can intersect, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, how we treat people and how the rights that we look at with people that from a Christian perspective can intersect with the world politics and the national politics. But again, that intersection doesn't mean that we start using the same tactics as the world, even if they are equal, right? Like if they're the government's politics or morality or agenda matches the Christian agenda, doesn't mean we start using the same tactics and have unilateral support for that just because it matches. We still follow, again, the higher standard of how we approach that, of how we speak, of how we express that with others.
And ultimately, I think that makes it an uphill battle for any Christian who wants to be in politics, because the side with no morality or subjective morality can play dirty, but we're held to a higher standard and we can't, or at least you shouldn't, right?
Right.
So, yeah, that's an uphill battle, and that's one of the reasons why in the United States we are trending further and further away from what God would say is appropriate or acceptable.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Anything else? Politics?
I don't think so. I think we covered a basic for a mini.
Yeah, pretty broad brush. But if you want to hear more on that, if you have particular thoughts, if you want us to dive into something or defend our position biblically, Bible Brodown at gmail.com, or visit us on the Facebook group, Bible Brodown. And I don't know, what else we got?
We got a debate coming up with Braxton and Matt Dillahunty. That's in like.
When you say we, you mean they're going to debate and we're going to watch.
When I say we, I mean the Trinity Commission, one of the members. So
all five of us will be on stage. No,
exactly. We'll be ready to duke it out. I'm actually going to be holding I went to Jonathan Braxton's when they went to the church in Wisconsin. We were talking about the debate and defending Braxton and different ways, and they said that they'll just use me as Braxton's podium. Like I'll stand there, right, and hold his books and his paper just like this, like facing him, right? That way, I could whisper things and intervene if I need to.
Spring out from the
right. I'd probably not be using Christian methods in that instance.
Probably not. Hey, are you going to be doing any kind of? So you can't make it in person. I'm going to try and be there in person. It's like a 6-hour drive for me, but you won't be able to make it in person. Are you going to have any kind of like live chat viewing thing?
I could. Is there a way to have a Facebook Live while watching that? Watching another face?
Plug your phone in and point it at you.
Yeah.
And then watch it on your computer.
Yeah, I could do that. I'll try to do that. Maybe.
And even if you don't do that, at least you could have, I don't know, some kind of chat group on Facebook, Facebook message. Just add anybody who wants to be in it, and y'all could all talk about it as it's going.
Right. Yeah, we'll just try to figure something out. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's it. Next week, we're going to be back with something. We don't know.
Right.
So look forward to something. It's going to be great.
It'll be fantastic, like it always is.
Always.
God
bless.
God bless.